the building of technical capacity in Grenada.
Thank you, Astrid. Welcome, Dr. Martin. Thank you very much. Astrid, we'll talk to you later. It's all Dr. Martin's. Dr. Martin, how are you doing?
Not bad at all. Thank you very much for this really wonderful evening. Very enlightening. And Astrid, I'm happy to hear your story, and I'm really glad that you did well. Yeah, so I'm just happy to be here. So go ahead.
Thank you for taking the call. Talk to us, Dr. Martin. COVID all over the place.
So yeah, well, COVID has been with us for more than a year and a half now, and has significantly affected the Caribbean in a way that really gets us all attention. A lot of people know a lot of things around with COVID, and because of the amount of information that we know about it, there can also be an opportunity for some confusion to take place. And indeed, the confusion is what has led to the disproportionate way in which some countries manage or were able to have the COVID response. The COVID-19 virus is a coronavirus, and we want to make that very clear. A coronavirus is a cold virus. And by nature of that, cold viruses are very unstable. And that's why people get the cold every year, because it's a coronavirus. The world has seen 4 coronaviruses before, and that's why at the back of the Lysol bottle, you're going to see that one of the viruses that the Lysol can kill is coronaviruses, because the world has seen 4 coronaviruses already. COVID-19 is the 5th coronavirus that the world has seen. So prior to this time, no humans was ever infected with a COVID-19 coronavirus. So now we have 5 coronaviruses that we now need to battle and handle. When the pandemic hit, our countries in the Caribbean huddled together and quickly realized that we need to have a very strategic way going forward to protect ourselves from COVID. There was a lot we didn't know. But one of the first things we learned is that COVID transmission rates are extremely high, and that virus can quickly spread from one person to the next. We also quickly learned that the virus is transmitted by droplets. And so having good hygiene or hand hygiene or respiratory hygiene was really and truly the way to stop this. And this kind of reminds me of some of the past pandemics, the Spanish flu, for example. These viruses have a way to use the simple things to transmit themselves from one person to the next. And so that's why at that time, the whole world was preaching that you should wear a mask safely, sanitize your hands as best as possible, and use social distancing. Well, from the beginning, I never used to say social distancing anyway. I used to call it a sensible, practical distancing, because some instances it's very difficult to have this distancing. But what was very specific for us here in the Caribbean, and in particular Grenada, at that time I was the chief medical officer. We were very clear that at that time, to keep Grenada safe, we had to stop COVID at the borders. And so what we did was fortified our borders in terms of our surveillance there, had a very good working relationship with the Immigration's office. So both the seaport and the airport is where we really worked on our surveillance, our ability to check temperatures, our ability to test, our ability to quarantine. And we worked so hard at this. And that's why we were able to keep Grenada so safe for a very long period of time, because we had a sort of a kind of a, if you want to put it, investigative team. So people tried to come into Grenada from hotspots across the world, and they didn't know that we had mechanism of tracking them to know where they actually came from. So people from Germany would fly to somewhere else and then come to Grenada to, they're coming from Barbados. We're thinking they're coming from Barbados, but we had ways of finding them out, taking them off the aircraft and quarantining them. And that kept us very safe. Now, because we did such a good job, it turned around that it harmed us in a way that the Grenadian public started losing some sense of reality as to really and truly what COVID could do. And so people started relaxing the measures, people started fighting the measures, if you want to put it that way, and really pushing the envelope. So I became very worried that if COVID ever entered Grenada, it's going to really do havoc, because I saw what was happening. And so when I started my vaccination sessions, I remember it was one of the sessions when the burden of this thing actually hit me. I told those people, I think I was doing a session for Country Cold Store. That was the first group of people that I told that based on what I'm seeing is happening here, if COVID comes into Grenada, it's going to have a very, very serious impact. Well, the writing has been on the wall and we now see the impact that it has been. Because Grenada was one of the few countries in the world that had an opportunity to vaccinate its population before its first wave. Not many countries could say that. And so Grenada was in a position to be the gold standard as to how pandemics should be handled. If we're able to vaccinate our people and stop our first wave, I believe we would have done much better. But that being said, it has gone and we're now here. Now, there's a very important thing about this virus that I want us to understand as Caribbean people. If you follow the epidemiology of the virus, you'd realize that we started with one variant in Wuhan, and now we have a number of variants, the Delta variant, and still another one that is affecting us. By closely studying this virus, you can see, or you should have seen, that whenever there is a high transmission rate in any part of the world, that's when new variants pop up. England new variant was when there was high transmission rates. South Africa's new variant was when there was high transmission rates in South Africa. Well, the Brazil variant, we all know that one. I saw the pictures of, acres and acres of cemetery when they were trying to bury as many people as possible. And that's when the new variant came up. The Delta variant, if you remember, was when India was having its highest transmission rate. Because you see, viruses live by infecting people. Viruses don't want to die. Viruses has no interest in killing anyone because the longer they keep you alive is the longer they can live. But the problem with viruses and their genetic material is that because they are so unstable, every time the virus spreads from one human to the next, that multiplication of the genetic material gives a chance that there might be errors in the new strand that is made because the viruses can be very unstable. That errors in the new strand is what leads to new variants. So in other words, the more transmission is the more chance for a variant. And so for that reason, I've been warning Caribbean people through wherever I can that if we allow transmission rates to be very high with us here in the Caribbean, it is quite possible that we ourselves might have our own variant here, a Caribbean variant. And that would be something that would really worry me a lot because whereby other countries around the world, including Brazil, have their ability to make vaccines and they have ability to make vaccines or boosters that can deal with the new variant. I don't know of any Caribbean island, certainly not the OECS, that have the ability to make vaccines. So we really have to be very careful about how much we allow this virus to transfer from one person to the next. We have now seen what a high transmission rate, that the Delta variant is. And when we were talking about the Delta variant being 1,000 times more transmissible, I don't think people fully understood what that meant, and I think Dr. Charles tried to put it in a way that I think may be able to work. And that is, if the Alpha variant was firing one bullet at you, then the Delta variant is firing 1,000 bullets at you at the same time. That's the measure of the transmission of the Delta variant over the other variants. And so it is very important for us to understand that going forward in the Caribbean and in Grenada in particular, we are now here and we have to live with COVID. The only how we can live with COVID is to not allow COVID to have the same impact that it has had in the last 4 weeks. As I may have said before, Astrid, I don't know when ever in our lifetime have we ever seen 200 people die in 4 weeks. I've never seen that. So that is the impact of COVID that you really have to deal with. And as a result of that, COVID is not going forward with COVID is not only going to have a physiological impact or a disease spreading impact, but there's a psychological impact it will also have on people. As a matter of fact, I believe that the psychological impact COVID will have on us will be far worse than what it is doing currently at the moment. Because there are a lot of people who have lost loved ones in a very short space of time that they can't deal with. Some people have lost their jobs. Some companies have gone bankrupt because of COVID. So this is going to be a very significant issue for people financially, locally, domestically, even spiritually, because some of the churches are not able to congregate as they should. So all of those impact COVID is going to have, and it is something we're really going to have to deal with going forward. I laughingly remember about 5 years ago, the World Health Organization indicated in one of their posts or something that in the year 2030, the most common diagnosis on the face of the earth will be depression. They said that, yeah, I think it was 5 years ago I read that. Now, when I remember that and I'm seeing what happened now, it brings chills to me, because very possible that depression, or if you want to put it, not just depression, but personality disorders, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, psychiatric issues might very well be the most common diagnosis on the face of the earth in the 2030 era. So going forward, as we deal with and live with COVID, we really have to start to think about those other areas that we have not thought about much before, because it is going to be part of our life going forward. I mean, there's a lot more that can be said about COVID, but a lot already has been said. And as usual, when I do sessions like this, I usually like to have a sort of question and answer session. So I don't want to belabor the point too much. I'll be happy to answer any question that someone may have once I am aware of what the answer could be. Over.
Are you sure you want to ask people to ask you questions, Dr. Martin? These people won't stop. You were warned and you ask. This is your opportunity to run out. But but Dr. Martin, the fact that you mentioned the mental health, what are we in the region doing to address the mental health issues that are going to arise?
Well, when I was chief medical officer and to a certain extent permanent secretary, it was one of the top of my to-do issues working with PAHO, and we were focusing on mental health for the frontline workers at that time. There was a little technical difficulty and we weren't able to go forward with it as planned. And then since I've left the ministry, we had not returned to that table yet. But knowing PAHO and our regional organizations as I do, like CAFA and so on, this is not something that they're going to drop, because it is going to be an issue. Even at our local hospital, we hired counselors and psychiatrists in the numbers that we've never hired before, because we recognize that psychiatric and a psychological outcome. So I think the narrative is going to change. I think it has already started to change, that the need for counselors, the need for that kind of thing. And I think that narrative will have to trickle down to other sectors, tourism sectors, and not just medical or psychiatric, but it has to happen everywhere. It has to happen at the church levels. It has to happen at the local organization level, so that everyone can actually be reached with those strong psychological outcomes that our COVID has impacted our society with. Over.
What can we do at home in our household so that we can have a healthy mental, be in a healthy mental state? Just anything practical.
I think, first of all, we have to recognize where is the home at the moment. I mean, is the home a stable one, or is it already a rocky environment? What is the social situation? Are there people with jobs? Are there mothers and fathers who's lost their jobs? And how do they deal with the issue of losing their jobs and so on? But overall, I think a spirit of understanding has to be part of what happens at home. Homes must not be judgmental. And a lot of the times homes have become fractured, if you want to put it that way, and not just over COVID, but over vaccinations, for example. Vaccinations has put an additional level of stress that families are divided over. So homes have to try and find a way not to be divisive. If someone tests positive, others must be able to support as best as possible. Granted, given the level of poverty that some of us have in our communities, it's difficult for us to have that kind of support that home should have. But the point is, members in the household should be open and loving and supportive and try and not be divisive as possible. If someone chooses to take a vaccine, allow them to go forward and not judge them because they choose to or not take a vaccine. So, I mean, it could never be a one size fit all, but it is something that, homes need to, sit and think about.
Dr. Martin, I got a little 11-year-old in here, and the vaccine seems to be coming to her. This is Caribbean folklore story time. This is how we do it, Dr. Martin. I mean, in terms of the children getting vaccinated, is it going to be the same strength as the adult, or is there going to be a variation?
I think what we have to do is to wait to see what the research, what the research is saying. When vaccines was rolled out, as a matter of fact, in the pharmaceutical companies, whenever a new therapeutic or a new whatever it is comes out, we would first roll it out in the general population, and then we're going to start turning our attentions to children, pregnant women, and breastfeeding women.
Okay.
And that is exactly what was done. Pfizer, for example, rolled out in the regular population, and then they did it in children 16 and over and 12 and so on. And this is the reason why we adopted the dose for what they did, because the dose you use would always be dependent on the research that was done and what was shown to be effective in that population. So we're going to wait to see what that is. I can't say what it is right now because we have to wait to see. I know the US I think the US is probably just about closing down to publish their data on vaccinating 5 to 11 years old. But based on how vaccines work, the mechanism of it, the body's response to it, I will not be surprised if the dose is the same. I don't think it really makes a difference in terms of the dose between adults and children.
Okay, thank you. Let me just remind you, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. And then
there's a Jenna James.
We have Mr. Jenna James. Thank you for raising your hand and waiting for us to acknowledge you. Go ahead, Mr. James.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wong. Good afternoon, Dr. The name slipped this minute.
Martin.
Anyway, Dr. Martin, good afternoon to Dr. Martin and everyone else listening. My question relates to the concept of herd immunity. And from my understanding is that we no longer have measles and mumps, polio existing in our society because through vaccines we have developed herd immunity. Now, I am hearing that the COVID-19 is an unstable virus, which means, well, it gives vaccine developers a bit of challenge because it is unstable. The question I want to ask, how does herd immunity comes into play, where the vaccine is not necessarily preventing people from developing the disease, and it is not necessarily preventing people from passing the virus from one person to the other. I understand as well that the vaccine prevents you from getting critically ill and potentially can prevent death. But how a vaccine that does not prevent you getting sick or prevent you passing the disease on or the virus on, how does herd immunity come into play there? I hope you understand.
Well, Mr. James, as it turns out, your question / statement isn't finished. And you don't even know it's not finished, but I'll tell you why it isn't finished, and then I'll allow you to finish it after. All right?
Yes.
So you ready?
Yes, I'm listening. I want the edification.
All right. Now, being vaccinated, there are people who get MMR vaccine and they got measles, mumps, and rubella and pass it on. There are people who got hepatitis vaccine and got hepatitis and passed it on. Even here, we had someone who took a chickenpox vaccine and got chickenpox. So the point is, Being vaccinated and getting the virus and pass it on is normal. It is normal in virology and it's normal in vaccinology. So it is normal for people to get COVID-19 vaccine and get COVID and pass it on. But the statement is not done. You have to continue. And here is the part you have to continue with. While it is normal, while it is possible to be vaccinated and get the virus and pass it on, the chance of it happening is much, much slimmer than if you are not vaccinated. Did you get it?
Yes, yes, yes.
And that's the point. So don't stop halfway. In other words, if there are 10 people who got the vaccine, one may get the virus and pass it on. The other 9 may not do it at all. However, if there are 10 people who are not vaccinated, 9 of them may get it and pass it on. So the point is, what you're saying, it is possible, but the chances of it happening is much, much slimmer than if you were not vaccinated.
Okay, final, and I mean, I'm not arguing, but I've been hearing, and I note that you use the example of the 9 out of 10, but through news and so on, I'm getting the impression, and again, I might be wrong, but I'm listening to the news all over, and seems to be hearing that in some societies that have far higher vaccine coverage than we do here in Grenada, people who have been vaccinated seems to be coming down infected. So again, this is what plays in my mind, you know, if so many people are vaccinated in some societies, then how come the number isn't going down relative to people among the vaccinated people? Because I mean, I haven't heard, the last year I heard somebody in Grenada had measles or mumps or polio. So that's really where my question is coming from. But anyway,
Yes.
Thanks very much for the edification.
Yes, and I can understand that question, and that question has merit. That question is true. And the reason it has merit and true is because of what I'm going to say next. First of all, you must remember that Caribbean people's experiences with vaccines are very different from other countries' experiences with vaccines. Our Caribbean story is a perfectly success story on vaccination. So Caribbean people, we're good at this thing. So we cannot use the experience that Europe has had. We cannot use the experience that the US has had, England has had, or Israel has had to make a forecast on our experience here in the Caribbean. We have our own. And by the way, have you seen the Caribbean people have managed this pandemic much more superior than the rest of the world? That's it. However, what you're saying there is absolutely true. Further to this truth is, if you look in the countries where these high infections are taking place, ask yourself what vaccine did they use? And when you ask yourself that question, you will get the answer that they use mostly Pfizer vaccine. Recall, Pfizer was the very first vaccine that came out. And because Pfizer was the first one that came out, Pfizer seems to have not do a great job with covering all the variances, including the Delta variant. And indeed, it was the Delta variant, or it is the Delta variant that is creating such havoc in those countries that you're talking about. Hence the reason the United States has made a decision that a booster will be necessary. AstraZeneca, because AstraZeneca came out later, AstraZeneca had a better opportunity to cover the variants, and that's why AstraZeneca seems to be holding its own so well in places and keeping the infections down so well. I took AstraZeneca because to my mind, I get a slightly more superior coverage. But of course, the anti-AstraZeneca campaign that was run seems to have worked because psychologically people are turned off from AstraZeneca and they've gone into Pfizer. So in Israel, where these high infections are taking place, in the US, where these high infections are taking place is because of the new variant and that the Pfizer seems not to be holding its own so well as we would expect it to against the new variant. AstraZeneca, for example, I read something out of England where there is a 60 to 75% coverage of the Delta variant from the AstraZeneca. I mean, it's not 100%, but at least it gives you some level of protection, even if it is not 100%. I hope that has helped you to answer the question.
Yes, it has. Thank you so kindly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. Thank you very much, Mr. James. We have some more comments that I would like to read. But Dr. Martin, I want to ask, I heard you talk about AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna. Well, I didn't hear you say Moderna yet, but I was waiting to hear when I'm going to hear the one, something singing like CARICOM, maybe one that is Eric Gary, Eric Williams. What's going on with the
I
side?
don't know.
What's going on? What's going on in the region?
Well, I'm not on the front line of Grenada's geopolitics anymore. So, but I have heard people ask about availability of other vaccines, and I honestly believe that the CARICOM region is going to use whatever vaccine we get available. Getting a vaccine is not as simple as taking a shopping cart and going to the supermarket and just pick up whichever vaccine you want. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot of back handling and that takes place when a country makes a decision. Certainly, the OECS goes into addresses vaccination as a group. So I know that the Caribbean region will be in discussion with other vaccine developers to see what other vaccines have become available. Some has asked me about Cuban vaccine and other vaccines. The same answer is going to happen. We have to depend on the OECS, PPS, and PAHO and so on to guide us in that direction as we go forward. But as we say in public health, and a good vaccine is the one in your arm, meaning that once a vaccine becomes available, take it. It doesn't matter which brand it is you're getting.
You know, Dr. Martin, without getting into politics and all that, with Barbados becoming a republic in a matter of days, the question that I wanted to really ask is, when are we going to become self-sufficient, make our own vaccines and sell to everybody else as Cuba or the same Pfizer? We got the minds.
Yes, that's a very, I mean, it is time that we as a region do this. But the problem with us as a region is that we're still tribalistic in some form or fashion. And I don't know when we are going to see past this issue. CARICOM has been around for such a long period of time. Has CARICOM really worked? I mean, the OECS have had some best practices. The OECS PPS, which is a drug procurement service, has shown the region that it is possible to come together under one umbrella. And so we just have to go with that spirit so that we can put ourselves together, because one country cannot do this. We have enough minds, we have brilliant minds and persons willing to do this, but I think we must get some political will and really have our society behind our back to make sure that we do what we have to do. But certainly I agree that this is something the region has to look into as we go forward into the sustainability.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to add Astrid, and then we're going to take some comments. Stand by, Miss Lisa Levi.
I have a question, Dr. Martin. So as the new variants come out, will we have to go and get a vaccine again? So is it that next year I have to get vaccinated again?
No. It's not going to work like that. And I hope it never works like this, because I'm going to be disappointed. When COVID came out last year, we were, as public health professionals, we were just hoping that once you get infection with COVID, you'll have lifetime immunity. We are all hoping that that was the case. But as you see, it didn't happen. And where people are getting reinfected. And we've seen what happened with influenza and the flu shot, where people have to get a flu shot every year. Yeah. So precedent has already been set that there are some viruses that are so unstable, you have to get a shot every year. I really don't wish that this is what's going to happen with COVID. It doesn't look like this way for now. It looks as though we're doing a pretty good job. If ever, I think what the countries may ask people to do is a booster, at least a booster. I can see that narrative coming along because of what we're seeing with the variants and so on. But beyond a booster, I am looking on as well to see what's going on, because of course I'm not at that kind of front line anymore, but I'll be disappointed if that's what has to happen.
Thank you.
What's the difference between a booster and a vaccine?
Becoming vaccinated, depending on the technology that is used, and maybe Dr. Richards could help us here as well, depending on the technology that was used to become fully vaccinated, in other words, for enough of the antibodies to be developed in your body, you need either 1, 2, or 3 doses. I think Cuba is using 3 doses. I think Johnson & Johnson is 1 dose, and AstraZeneca is 2, and so on and so forth. The way I can explain it is that a booster is like studying for an exam, and just before the exam, you study the notes one more time so that your memory cells remember just a little bit more than what you remembered in the first two times. I think this is the simplest way for me to explain what a booster is.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Richards?
I wanted to remind everybody briefly that we do produce all sorts of things in the region. Puerto Rico, just up the road, though it's part of the United States, is actually a pharmaceutical factory for the United States. The United States gave Puerto Rico certain tax privileges. So a lot of companies had moved to Puerto Rico and manufacture all sorts of medical instruments, medical supplies, and specialty medical products. That is why when the hurricane went through Puerto Rico, you started hearing about hospitals in the States being short of things like gloves and so on. And I believe that they are responsible for developing and making some types of vaccines. But let us not forget the largest island of all in our region, right? Cuba, which has never cut itself off from us on purpose, has always reached out to us, right? And is one of the most powerful vaccine developing countries of all developing countries in the world. Comment?
Dr. Richards, absolutely, absolutely. And we're all looking and hoping that we can get through with Cuba and so on. But of course, this discussion is beyond this forum here now. But we do know that the embargo that United States has on Cuba is making it a bit more difficult for some islands. But I believe that our leaders are going to do the appropriate negotiation when the time comes. And we all have to put our support behind Cuba. Cuba has never turned back on us here in the Caribbean. And we have to stand up with Cuba at the end of the day. I completely support this.
Thank you, Dr. Richards. Dr. Martin, you have a question from Miss Lisa Thomas in England. This woman look as though she wants to get you locked up. I don't understand what she's about. She says, if you get one brand of vaccine, can you change the brand for a booster?
Actually, yes, you can.
Oh, shoot.
Well, I hope I understand the question. I hope I understand the question. The science is showing us two things. That in your vaccination, you can mix brands in your first and second dose. You could do this. The science says it's all right. Science also says that you can take one brand to become vaccinated, and you can take another as your booster. So those two permutations are actually okay. Now, countries may choose not to do it or do it based on logistics and other issues within their health countries, but the studies and the science seems to support that this is actually okay. In fact, some studies have shown that you actually get a superior coverage by doing that.
Okay, she's satisfied. So we have a question from Ms. Lambert, Rachel Lambert. She says, we have seen in other parts of the world up to 4 waves of COVID. In the Caribbean and Grenada in particular, this seemed like the first wave to me. While I recognize that you're no longer part of the COVID task force, can you speak to any steps that are being taken to prepare for subsequent waves?
Well, I am not aware of anything on the ground, but what I'm going to say is this. When the pandemic hit, and our strategy was one of keeping COVID out, that strategy felt squarely in the lap of Ministry of Health and our leaders, squarely. And that's what we did. We supported the ports. We barricaded ourselves, so to speak. However, now that COVID is here, the strategy has to change. It is no more about what ministry is doing. It is no more about what the police is doing. It is no more about what leaders are doing. It is now shared responsibility. That's how I call it, shared responsibility. Everybody needs to get up and do something. In the height of our transmission, what we found in Grenada was that the transmission rates in homes and communities was much higher than the transmission rates in businesses and workplaces. So in other words, people went home and get infected. They didn't go to work to get infected. They got infected in their homes and in the communities by sitting and turning down and not paying attention to the measures and so on. That's what has to happen. So there must be a national dialogue on how can each citizen do their part to stop the virus from getting into a second wave. Because you cannot have a police officer by every household. It's not going to happen. People need to take shared responsibility, and I think that is what. So I think if ever something has to be done, it must be a national campaign to let everyone realize their responsibility.
Great answer, said Dr. Anthony Richards. Hazel Wilson, Dr. Martin, well, you got a compliment. Dr. Martin was quite informative. His presentation was great. Thanks, Astrid, for your story, and good health to you going forward. Greetings to all from Toronto. Thank you very much, Hazel, and welcome. Jennifer Hosford, out in New York. She wants to know what are the preventative measures. I'm not too sure. I believe that was based on a statement that you made, but I'm going to add her here real quick because we have about 3 other activities to come up. Go ahead, Mrs. Hosford. Your phone was
sorry, I was multitasking, so the mute wouldn't work. It worked now. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer from New York. I'm delighted to hear Dr. Martin. I have first-hand experience with him, and it's very moving for me. He took care of my dad, and then he realized he had to take care of all the sisters in the house with the mental health. So I say it publicly because you did a great job with the family, and you did a great job with families. And we always remember you for a professional. You really, really understood the need to take care of mental health. So seeing that you had the stats from the World Health, well, our question is, how do we prevent? How do we keep that in mind that so many people will go through depression, so many people will experience all kinds of psychosocial disorders, and how do we come up with some preventative measure? I mean, like in terms of making it a policy, that is the area I'm interested in. What policies will be in place? So thank you, Ms. Anne, for including me, and I thank you.
I believe you, Jennifer, that there must be some policy that speaks to that. And I think this is why PAHO started to make it become part of the agenda in terms of its relevance. So as I say, I am not aware of any policy itself that was completed yet, but I know for sure that they have started that discussion. It was just unfortunate there was a little technical difficulty why we didn't continue and go forward with it, but it is still there. So I can't speak to anything that is currently going on, but I trust in these institutions and I trust in what have left there. So I'm pretty sure that the policies are going to come. The training needs are going to be looked at and given opportunities in terms of scholarships and so on to do psychiatry and psychology and so on. It is going, as a matter of fact, our local institutions now, we have a number of students going on getting scholarships to do psychology. And so all of that is putting together the different activities that we need to go forward in preparing ourselves.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. And Janice Henry says, great presentation. Special thanks to Dr. Martin for the cutting edge updates. Dr. Richard, Dr. Martin is a great choice, Astrid. Thanks. Oh Lord, Miss Henry called me sister, and I tell you, a lucky Lord for me. Thank you very much, Miss Henry. Well, I think we're going to make this the last question. I told you, do not ask Caribbean folklore storytellers to ask questions. They will have you here for the whole night, so it sounds like you have to come back. What sort of policies would help? This is Miss Lisa Thomas.
I think it would have to be policies that speak to priority needs, priority training needs. for specific things. So this is one where I think Ministry of Health and Education need to work together. So they must have a policy that speaks to, if our need is going to be X in 10 years, then X percent of our scholarship must be in that general area. I think that is one of the things. Also, policy that speaks to what the complement of your team should look like. When I was in secondary school, in the days of my secondary school, there were no counselors in school as a policy. But today, it looks as though there are counselors in schools as a policy. So I think something like that may also may need to take on board. Yeah, there was something that is called health in all policies. That means every department or every ministry or every organization must have some part of their function or the structure that speaks to health. And so that sort of health in all policy mentality could also be a policy that can help in bridging the gap and having enough people in places to provide the care that they need at any specific time.
Good. So Dr. Martin,